On October 24, 2003, tens of thousands of people gathered near Heathrow Airport to witness the end of the supersonic travel era. At 4:05 p.m., the British Airlines Concorde completed its last trip from JFK. After almost 30 years in service, the engineering marvel flying at twice the speed of sound retired for a whole host of reasons. The final nail in its coffin was the 9/11 effect, which deepened a global recession and brought commercial and particularly business travel to a standstill. People no longer wanted to pay $11,700 for Concorde's round-trip flight, even though it was faster than Earth's rotation. The 9/11 shock significantly reshaped travel, with the Concorde fleet just one item in the long list of losses. But eventually, the industry adapted to a new reality and recovered. Over the past decades, time and time again, travel business survived wars, energy shocks, economic downturns, natural disasters, and epidemics. It gained sound experience by learning lessons from crises long before the 2020 coronavirus pandemic started. Travel after COVID-19, learning from previous industry crises. "9/11 was not the first bitter blow for Concorde. Only 20 supersonic jets were ever built because of another crisis, which occurred during Concorde's early days. Superfast aircraft consumed too much fuel, while oil prices suddenly soared to new heights. The 1970s oil shocks. December 1973. America is paralyzed by a so-called energy Pearl Harbor, or the first oil shock. Thousands of cars are queuing for miles and waiting for hours to get filled up. Signs of gasoline stations tell drivers about sale restrictions or just offer short explanations instead of gas. "Don't be fuelish" is a new national motto. The events that put an end to an era of cheap and abundant oil in the Western world unfolded 2 months earlier, thousands of miles away, in the Middle East. Saturday, October 6, 1973, on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, the celebration was interrupted by a sudden attack launched by Egypt and Syria. The United States and other Western countries supported Israel with weapons and supplies. In response, the Arab leaders from the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, used its oil weapon. They increased the price of oil by 70% and put an oil embargo on all Israel's backers. The Yom Kippur War lasted less than 3 weeks, but the embargo stretched into March 1974. When it was lifted, the oil prices had already jumped fourfold and hit $12 per barrel, or $70 in today's values. Alas, in 1979, history repeated itself. The Middle East threw the West into a second energy crisis. This time, it was provoked by the Iranian Revolution, which ended with the fall of the US-backed Shah. And yes, oil prices doubled. 2 oil crises badly shook air transport with its sensitivity to fuel prices. Airlines cut the number of flights, stopped painting their planes to reduce the weight, and started flying at lower speeds to economize on fuel consumption. The largest and best airliner of the time, the Boeing 747, was stripped of all of its sofas and lounges in favor of more seating and a lower cost per passenger. But despite all the efforts, many carriers went bankrupt. It was not until the mid-1980s that commercial air transport returned to profitability. The 1970s oil crises raised the critical questions of fuel economy. The next decade saw the growing use of lightweight composite materials instead of aluminum in airframe construction and reduction of cruising speeds. Flights in the 21st century are slower than they were in the 1960s, with one exception, the Concorde. Yet, it didn't survive another great crisis that by far outperformed the destructive effect of the 1970s energy shocks. The 9/11 terrorist attack. The Al-Qaeda attack of September 11, 2001, a new day of infamy, did not only push the global economy into a deeper recession. The live images of 2 jets crashing into the Twin Towers spread an unprecedented fear of flying across the world. Millions of viewers saw hijackers using passenger aircraft as weapons, for the first time in history. In the immediate aftermath, the American commercial fleet was grounded for 3 days, and when regular flights recommenced, the demand for air travel dropped dramatically. It took commercial aviation years to recover to passenger levels it enjoyed before 9/11. By then, the industry had undergone profound changes. The 9/11 tragedy was a test of aviation security which totally failed. So, 2 months after the attack, the American government created the Transport Security Administration, or TSA, to develop new rules governing flight safety. As a result, in today's reality, all baggage is screened for explosives. Airports are equipped with full-body scanners. Passengers may not take knives on board, except for plastic and round-bladed butter ones. During the flight, passengers are not allowed to enter the cockpit. Cockpit doors are reinforced and bulletproof. And there are more air marshals on flights. Everything seems to be under control, if it were not for invisible enemies. The first SARS outbreak. Room 911 on the 9th floor of the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong. The combination of numbers may remind you of the 9/11 tragedy, but that doesn't explain why it scared away guests and was eventually renamed. This story began on February 21st of 2003 at about 5 p.m. when Dr. Liu Jianlin, a 64-year-old expert in respiratory diseases from Guangzhou in mainland China, checked into a sadly remembered room. The medical professional had mild flu symptoms, but they didn't stop him from traveling to Hong Kong for his nephew's wedding. The next morning, he was admitted to intensive care with respiratory failure. Dr. Liu warned the medical staff that he had previously treated patients with atypical pneumonia in Guangzhou. Within 2 weeks, the Chinese doctor died from what was later called the severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS-CoV, SARS-CoV. During his one-night stay at the hotel, Dr. Liu somehow infected 7 other guests who took the new virus overseas, namely to Vietnam, Singapore, and Canada. In the middle of March, the World Health Organization declared a global emergency over the new outbreak and issued the recommendation to postpone trips to affected areas. The SARS epidemic became the first classic example of how tourism facilitates the spread of viral infections across the globe. The disease quickly reached 29 countries, infected over 8,000 people. How did the world respond to this new challenge? Affected states implemented screening for SARS and border entry points and quarantine measures. There was enormous panic as SARS had no cure and its mortality rate reached a dismaying 10%. China and Canada imposed local quarantines, people wore face masks, and canceled trips to Asia. As a result, hotels in China and Hong Kong suffered a drastic decrease in guest arrivals, reporting a 20% occupancy level. But air travel was hit the hardest. At the peak of the outbreak, in May, Asia Pacific Airlines saw a 35% traffic drop. Though the situation might seem on its face pretty similar to the COVID outbreak, it never caused a huge worldwide lockdown. Luckily, the deadly infection appeared to have relatively low transmissibility. 8 months later, after the first case was detected, the virus died out. Traditional measures such as screening, testing, and isolating patients were effective enough to contain the epidemic. So, people sighed with relief and resumed a normal existence. Somewhere, say in Hong Kong, new health guidelines for hotel operators were issued. But above all, the travel sector strived to cope with negative memories as panic had hit the industry harder than the virus itself. Metropole Hotel, which hosted Patient Zero, was eventually renamed to Metropark Kowloon. Earlier, the number of room 911 was quietly replaced with a plate reading 913 so it would not frighten away sensitive guests. No wonder that places associated with risks creep tourists out. However, sometimes an after effect can be quite the opposite, causing the influx of visitors to a trouble spot, as it was with one restless Icelandic volcano. Eyjafjallajökull eruption. In April 2010, 10.5 million tourists were suddenly forced to change their travel plans. All of them became victims of Iceland's large volcano with an unpronounceable name, Eyjafjallajökull. After over 200 years of sleep, it awoke to spew a huge ash cloud that caused the largest shutdown of European airspace since the Second World War. From the 15th to the 21st of April, 108,000 flights were canceled and 313 airports closed, with European air traffic dropping by half. But along with ash and smoke, the previously unknown volcano spread awareness of Iceland as well. The tongue twister became the island's lure number 1 for travelers. Since the eruption, the country has been benefiting from the boom in tourism, dropping a lot of money into Iceland's coffers. In 2017, foreign visitors outnumbered locals by 7 to 1. In recent years, Iceland had to deal with large crowds. It joined the countries largely suffering from over-tourism, the circumstances that exist when an excessive number of visitors damages the environment and has a harmful impact on residents' lives. The problem of over-tourism affected numerous top destinations worldwide. Tourists overcrowding streets and squares of Rome, Barcelona, Paris, and other historic European cities. Mountaineers leaving tons of rubbish on Everest. Beachgoers and scuba divers destroying coral reefs in the Philippines. The coronavirus pandemic put all this on hold. The COVID-19 pandemic. Empty airports, closed hotels, silent museums, deserted resorts. Pictures from around the world show the eerie quietness throughout previously busy locations. Never before has the global travel industry suffered such massive revenue and job losses. Roger Dow, president and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, warns the impact on travel is 6 or 7 times greater than the 9/11 attacks. Yet, he remains optimistic. Over the long term, we will come back to business as usual. People have short memories and there will be a pent-up desire to travel. But exactly when will it happen? Previously, the travel industry recovered from outbreaks within 6 to 7 months after the epidemic peak. This time, it might take much longer. Some experts argue that even under the best scenario, demand for air travel will return to normal by mid-2021. Other analysts warn that carriers are likely to reach 2019 levels in roughly 7 years. Meanwhile, popular destinations around the globe can pause for breath and heal from traumas. In London, the coronavirus lockdown gave municipal employees a rare opportunity to repaint the iconic Abbey Road crossing, one of the most famous sites associated with the Beatles. In Venice, typically murky canals became clear enough to see fish. In New York, Los Angeles, Barcelona, and Madrid, air pollution significantly dropped. Though these changes are temporary, they are a positive sign that ecosystems are almost as resilient as travel. One of the lessons people have to learn after coronavirus ends is how to preserve the environment without crippling the economy. What other trends are likely to shape the travel industry in a post-coronavirus world? Let's try to look ahead. Post-coronavirus, how will travel change? Presumably, all players, whether airlines, cruise ships, or hotels, will put much more effort into sanitizing surfaces their customers interact with. Some modest social distancing may become a new normal, which means thinner crowds at top locations, fewer passengers on flights, and more self-service technologies implemented. Besides, health monitoring in airports may outlive the current pandemic by far. Etihad Airways is the first airline testing the new solution to automatically measure the temperature, heart rate, and respiratory rate of passengers when they use check-ins, information kiosks, and other airport touchpoints. In the future, such health screeners will help slow down the spread of viral infections. As you see, the coronavirus will surely change the travel, but not necessarily for the worse.